Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Economic Briefcase program on Camnet TV. Camnet TV, not just another channel. Today we have prepared for you yet another interesting topic. First of all, before I mention the topic, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Mr. Noah Njapao.
Good evening, viewers.
How have you been?
It's been a hectic week.
Yeah, it has been.
It's been a hectic week, but we're balancing, we're managing.
So today we are going to discuss with you or share with you information that have got to do with national economic development. We are looking at certain things that you see, but you actually do not know. Those things are there, and they have not been explained in principles and theories. So today, please don't turn off your channels. Continue watching. We are going to open the phone lines today. You can send your messages on the number that is below your screens. Today we are discussing laggards and economic development. Can African countries become first world nations? Zambia is almost approaching 60 years. Ghana even older. And a lot of other countries. Ethiopia has never been colonized. Ethiopia is very old. When are we going to achieve third world status? This is what we are going to discuss today. And in our studio today is a man that needs no introduction. A lot of you have read him. He's a writer, a consultant. He was at one time Chief Executive Officer of the Securities Exchange Commission, the regulator for capital markets in Zambia, the stock markets, LUSE in particular, and he's an academician. He's a national asset. And in our studio today is Dr. Idi Wala CHABALA. Doc, good evening.
Good evening. I was wondering whether it was you, it was me you were talking about when you were doing the introduction. But good evening.
Good evening. Economic laggards. I know a lot of people, when we did the adverts, a lot of people were asking, what this is all about. Me and my colleague, Mr. Njapao, had to open our dictionaries to understand
the word
laggards.
We're always learning a new word every day, so I'm sure there are some viewers out there also wondering, what does this word mean? But we always learn something new every day. So
enthusiasts, don't leave us. As per tradition, we need to give you, the current affairs, what is really happening. We are going to discuss Ukraine in terms of the economic sense or the economic implications. But before we go that, let's jump into money markets, capital markets, and just commodity markets. Mr. Noah, over to you.
okay, as usual, we'll start with our average exchange rates. Close day. So the dollar was selling at 17.66 in Ngwe. The pound was selling at 23.63 in Ngwe. The euro was selling at 19.71 in Ngwe, and the rand was selling at 1.15 in Ngwe. Then we move on to the LME metal prices. The selected metal prices. So the copper was trading at $10,005. That's per ton, and we've seen a change downwards of 0.15%. Zinc traded at $615.50. That's a downward movement of 0.34%. Nickel was trading at $24,950. That's a downward movement of 2.73%. Aluminium was trading at $3,323.50. That's a downward movement of 2.82%. Tin was trading at $44,750. That's an upward movement of 0.11%. Lead was trading at $2,347.50. That's also an upward movement of 0.54%. Then we move on to crude oil prices. The WTI crude closed off trading at $98.99 per barrel. That's an upward movement of about 7.48%. That's a huge movement there. Brent crude is closed off trading at $104.29. That's also an upward movement of 7%, 7.69%. Then we move to the selected few household commodities, essentials. We haven't seen any change. Prices haven't changed much for the past week. The mini meal 25 kgs is still trading at 160. Roller meal is still trading at 140 for 25 kgs. Sugar 1 kg is trading at 27 kwacha. Cooking oil 5 liters selling at 245 kwacha. Carpenter Meda 200 kwacha. Beans Meda 170 kwacha. Linkubala Meda 150 kwacha. Dry fish at 150 kwacha. A tray of eggs is at 62 kwacha. Milk 500 mils is at 11 kwacha. Bread is at 14 kwacha. That's all we had for you today on market updates. And we've seen that the crude oil price has actually gone up.
And that brings us to Ukraine. So a lot of people, before we digest laggard economies, a lot of people asking what's happening to Ukraine. So Ukraine as a country was formed. First, Ukraine or Kiev was the first capital city of the Russian Empire. So Russians a long time ago, a long time ago, 800 years ago, 1,000 years ago, they used to live, in isolation. So when the Rus or the Russian nation came together, their capital city was Kiev, and it was known as Kievskaya Rus or Kiev Rus. Then with time, the Tsars moved the capital city to Moscow, and basically Moscow, Russians, Tatars, Chechnyans, Dagestanians, and everybody lived under the Russian Empire as one. Now, Ukraine as a country was formed, after the fall of the Russian Empire, when the Tsar was killed and the communists took over the Russian Federation. And the first Secretary General of the party was Lenin, and Lenin, started creating republics within the Russian Empire, and so created Ukraine. Now, parts of the territory. So Ukrainians are different from Russians. They have different languages, but the languages are more like Bantu in the way we have Bantu speaking. So what happened was that in trying to consolidate regions, because these were competing with each other economically, certain portions from the integral Russian lands were given to Ukraine. That is Crimea, Eastern Europe, where you find predominantly Russian speaking, and the Western Ukraine, where you have Ukrainians. So in 1991, when the Soviet Union was breaking away, those Russians that were for administrative purposes were moved to Ukraine. Became an integral part of Ukraine, Crimea, and Eastern Europe. So Eastern Europe, that's where you find the Russian-speaking, and Crimea, and Western Europe, you find the Ukrainians. So with time, of course, people want to move together, and we started seeing, of course, power struggles. We can call them tribal conflicts between the Ukrainians and the Russians, and the way they selected presidents, because when you look at the number of people, they are more like half-half, you know. So this time somebody who's pro-Russian comes in, and pro-Ukrainian comes in, and so on and so forth. So in 2014 or somewhere there, they had, you know, a pro-European, a pro-Russian president who was faced with two choices. One, either form an economic bloc with the European Union, or form an economic union with Russia. And there was a tug of war. I think he was given about 4 billion in support, and reduced gas prices for the gas by Russia, and he joined a union with Russia. So basically, the Western Ukrainians did not like that. They went on the street, and you saw a revolution there, which brought in President Poroshenko. Poroshenko's term came to an end. They had elections, and now you have President Zelensky. When Zelensky came in, Ukrainians, Western Ukraine always wants to, you know, to have, European connections. So they went to integration with the European Union. And by that time, Crimea already had been had voted to join Russia. So the Ukrainians wanted to get back Crimea or Crimea, and until recently, the Eastern Europeans also started saying we want to break away and form our nation. So there has been an 8-year war that has been going. Now shelling has been happening predominantly in Russian occupied territories. So these are people that went to Moscow and asked if they could be assisted by Moscow, because, I mean, they are the same people. And, of course, NATO, Ukraine's ambitions to join NATO, which was created to counter the Russian Federation or Russia, Putin thought, or the Russians thought it was not going to come, because if, for example, a missile can travel about 30 meters from the earliest point country that is a NATO member, it will now, if Ukraine joins, it will take just 4 minutes. So Russia went in first, and that's where we have. So what is the economic effect? The economic effect is that Russia is a major oil producer, major gas producer, wheat. It produces about 12% of the wheat that is bread. So if, and Ukraine...
Gas to Europe?
To Europe, it basically...
Americans, Canada also
import gas from Russia. So what we are going to have now, Ukraine also is a major supplier of agricultural inputs. And now they are moving from winter to spring.
Yes.
So meaning this is the time they have to start preparing their fields. So if the war escalates, you expect that the amount of wheat that is going to be produced is going to reduce, and the wheat prices are going to go up high, and those are determined on the international commodities market. So it means the prices of bread in Zambia are going to go up. Mabanzi, Vitumbua, na Vasala.
And also looking at, now we are subject to reviewing our pump prices every month according to ERB. So meaning with this change, with this jump, because now we are beyond $100 mark, does that mean our pump prices will be reviewed and changed?
Of course. I remember in around 2006, 2007, fuel pump prices even reached about $140 per barrel. So to breach that mark, it's, so this is like prices moving up by about 50%. So with a market reflective, pricing mechanism that we have in Zambia, we expect also fuel pump prices to go up high as much, maybe reach maybe even 30 if the crisis escalates. So that's how the Ukrainian crisis can affect that. Now we have seen, as I was talking, our friends have structured economies. They have interests and they have what? And this brings us to today's topic, laggard economies. Doc.
Yes, an interesting topic. We were discussing earlier on what the definition of laggards could be.
He introduced you quite well, but I'm sure our viewers would like to also
know a bit more about.
Yes,
there might be one or two people.
There might be a constituency looking for an MP.
That will have to be in Serenge somewhere where I come from. I think in terms of just saying a bit more about who Wala is, a lot of people, some of the viewers will actually be thinking, this dude writing about economics, we know him as a chemist. Some will be saying, but he was my classmate in the chemistry class, C340 and C320 and those subjects. And yes, I have studied chemistry, and the doctor comes from the PhD, which is in chemistry, from the University of Cambridge. And you know how it goes. People say, this chap, Cambridge.
So not everyone gets to make it into Cambridge.
Yes. So, viewers, you know that we are getting you the right people.
But also people start, putting question marks. Really? Did he do that? So what you do is just mention a number of people that were in Cambridge at the same time that you were there. And they're like, oh yeah, so if Professor Mumba, the current Vice Chancellor, was at Cambridge, was he there at the same time as you? And the answer is yes. So
that's my boss. You know that, I'm mingling with your friends.
Yeah. If you know that the Vice Chancellor of UNZA did his PhD at Cambridge, I was there at the same time. But then how come I'm actually talking about economics here? How come I've written about economics? Oh, you might want to debate that as well. But, along the way, one of the very crucial subjects I've always thought we need to actually master as individuals, as a country, is the issue of economic development. How come almost 60 years after independence, for some of the African countries, more than 60 years after independence, we don't seem to show fruits of the struggle that we went through to achieve independence? How come some of these countries seem to be as if they are just coming out of independence, so many decades after independence? And I have a 3.5-year-old son. And earlier today, I was with a young man I worked with at SEC. You mentioned SEC. And he saw a picture, my son saw a picture on the phone of me giving the book to somebody. And he goes, oh, my daddy's book. And the young man by the name of Michael Piri says, oh, you know your daddy's book? He says, yes. And he asks him, what is it about? And he says, it's about snails. There's a picture of the snail on the there's a picture of the snail on the book, and my son gets it. My 3.5-year-old son gets it absolutely right when he says it's about snails. It's as if some countries, out of the starting blocks of independence, have been moving at a snail's pace, have just been sort of creaching forward and not making much progress. But there are some that have actually progressed very, very fast out of the starting blocks of independence, that have achieved industrialization to the extent that now they could be called first world countries. They are advanced economies for all intents and purposes. So I think that this classification we've had for a long time, where some countries are called first world, others are called third world, for me, when I've thought about it, reflected about it, and indeed leading to the writing of what you have in your hands there, Doc, it's a static system. It connotes fixed positions, okay? It connotes a big chasm, a big gap between the first and the third. And it's like it can't be crossed, it can't be, jumped. But we know economies, as I said earlier, that have actually gone from independence the last few decades to becoming newly industrialized economies, newly advanced economies, as I like to call them. So we should move away from this picture of static fixed positions to one of relativity, and the picture of relativity therefore says, if we all started at the same time, some have advanced faster than the others. It's actually possible that all of us can move towards that position the others have been occupied of industrialized, newly industrialized economies. So if we call ourselves, therefore, as just laggard economies, not third world, not least developed, but laggard economies relative to those that have actually advanced from the starting position of the same as us, then we'll be looking at this issue of development differently. So my scientific background up to PhD, switching to economics master's degree, pretty much made me start thinking that we need to actually change the parameters of looking at how we view ourselves. We are not third world, we are not least developed, we are actually laggard economies. We are lagging those that we started with at the same time, have advanced phenomenally forward. How do we therefore bridge that gap is one question. The other question is, how do we explain our laggardness? How do we explain that we've been moving at a snail's pace from the starting blocks of independence?
Doc, I have been, the past 24 hours, I've been trying to read this book, and I've been reading very interesting. I think this can be used as a memo or or instructions on how not to develop countries. Right. First, getting the lessons, right, and what we need to do to develop a nation.
Right.
So looking at African countries,
right,
one of the major issues you say that the first and biggest character or actor that contributes to the lagging of economies.
Right.
I know, viewers, Zambia and South Korea, we were at the same level in 1964. Right. But they have accelerated.
Is it Singapore?
Singapore.
Yes, they have developed and we haven't. There's one thing that you call the Godfather.
Right.
Explain to us this phenomenon.
Yeah. So I guess maybe before we go into specific characters, just to say that I have given disclaimers in this book that the doc showed up earlier on. Disclaimers to the extent that this is not your usual economics textbook. Your usual economics textbook, as I studied in the Masters in Economics that I did at Manchester, would go and look at a lot of data over time, what we call time series data, or to look at data from different places, panel type data that tries to compare different, situations across different countries, and then therefore arrive at a conclusion. Therefore, that's why these countries that we put in this bucket we call third world don't develop, or that's why this and this phenomenon is important for the development of these countries. This book is not about that. What this book has done is to actually try to make this issue of economic development accessible to anybody who can happen to read this. And for me, the biggest joy I've had this year so far is a young lady that works for Plascon, a chemical engineer with a chemistry background like myself, only 23 years old, that got a book from somebody and read it and then wanted to meet me. And she meets me and she says, for the first time, it's like I've had a peek at how the structure of government works or doesn't work, And she goes on to say, I was actually very upset when I read this. It's like I'm thinking, it's so simple, it's so straightforward. Why some countries don't actually advance? So how come we haven't actually been advancing? How come we've actually been in this status with all these actors and malforms and malfunctions that have made us not develop? And I said to her, but that's exactly the intent of this book. It's to provoke you, it's to provoke others to think, this thing that seems to have been eluding us for so long, maybe it isn't so difficult. Maybe it's actually within reach of all of us to do something about it. So when we go to characters, and you mentioned the the godfather. That's trying to caricature, I suppose, the epitome of power in these entities that have lagged behind, and saying that, you know, the way that power is actually structured, it's as if we are talking about the godfather in the criminal organization or criminal gang. The same way that in the criminal gang, the godfather is at the epitome of the organization, and from there issues orders and directives. From there pulls strings, you know, here and there. From there basically controls the entire empire with so much power that they can actually call for the elimination of any entity that stands in their way to achieve personal goals. That godfather caricature seems to be what these laggard economies have. And because it's a godfather type caricature, therefore, it amasses not only power but also wealth into that one entity. Of course, therefore, at the expense of the advancement and the development of the economy. And because it's a godfather, it does not give too much care and concern about the impact, adverse as they may be, or the effects on the rest of the people, for as long as it has all that power and it uses that power to amass the wealth. So that's where the state godfather concept comes from. And if you think about it, and if you go and have a review of all the countries that we can put in this laggard bucket or basket, I think you see that a lot of them have that tendency or that phenomenon of a godfather type thing, you know.
I agree with you. You know, I always believe that the person that developed the nation is a leader.
Right.
I'll give you my life experience. First, let's look at Zambia. We had Kenneth Kaunda. I'm not going to talk about our modern leaders. Let me talk about the deep history.
Right.
So that we don't, yes. So when you look at Kaunda,
Ruffle feathers.
yes, when you look at Kaunda, this is a person who was young,
yeah,
and created a first cabinet. He had ambitions.
Right.
So he said, okay, we are going to create industry, we are going to do this, we are going to do that. Now, the generation he was the leader, and he was the one who was, he wanted to create jobs, educate Zambians, create schools, infrastructure, everything. And to some extent, he developed. People say Kaunda made a lot of mistakes. I think it's the generations that came after that, a generation that did not understand where Kaunda was coming from. I think they're the one that betrayed him. That's one. Two, I think a leader cannot be there forever. They have to leave at one point, so that another godfather can come in. I believe that the head is very instrumental in national economic development. I'll give you an experience, Rasha. I went there when Yeltsin was the president. Yeltsin was basically drunk most of the time. And you could see they had the potential, they had the industry, but things were very bad. Then came in young Putin. Russians were not driving. They were driving but old cars. They were making old cars. This guy just came in and within 10 years paid off all debt, you know, built new houses, basically changed the appearance of cities, and so on and so forth. It takes a leader to develop a nation, right, to some extent. And I really agree with this book. And my conclusion is that in lagging economies, what we lack is that person who's going to pull all citizens to move in what? In one direction, right, for the betterment of all. They, instead of pulling the nation, they come back behind, sit and start creating a comfort zone around themselves and the people that surround them. And that brings us to the God men. Right.
Before you move on to the God men, actually I've just had a thought right now. saying these economies are laggard because of certain structures or the way things are done in some places. But when we look at, I'm just thinking out loud, you know, when we look at capitalism and when we look at communism, the time the world was moving to capitalism, there were already certain industries at play at that point, right? Especially, let's say, in Africa. And most of these industries were owned by the colonial masters.
Right.
Yes. So isn't it that the system that was introduced as capitalism was, you know, if you have the funds, you make the rules.
Right.
Yes. If you have the funds, you make the rules. And if you have the capital, you actually advance faster than someone who doesn't have the capital.
Yeah.
So at that point, I feel those other economies were already at a certain level. They already had the funds, the capital. Yeah, I'm just thinking out loud. I don't know. I can be corrected.
It's
like you put, you get a ring, you get a heavyweight and the featherweight, and tell them compete.
Right.
So it's just a thought that I have.
Yeah, that's Nyerere's, and that's actually an important analogy. And Nyerere actually said that. He said you actually can't put a heavyweight and a featherweight in a ring and say fight. And in saying that, he was saying, you know, the first world trying to basically compete with the third world. The playing field was not even, was not equal. And I think hence actually the emphasis on laggard or laggardness as opposed to the static, you know, conventional third world, first world structure. But if you are alluding to the fact that the countries that have emerged as newly industrialized or newly advanced, as I like to call it, economies, it's because they had capital and the others didn't have capital. The ones that we are now calling laggards didn't have capital. I think that's part of the equation, obviously. But then the question is still asked, how come those manage to attract capital? They obviously established structures and systems such that anybody that wanted to invest their capital for a return felt that we're going to get a return in those places.
A good deal, basically.
Versus other places, right? If we're talking about Godfather, if you were going to compare putting money in a place where the Godfather tendency wanted to amass everything for themselves, or their cronies that we are now referring to as godmen, versus for the benefit of the expansion of the whole economy, for the advancement of the whole economy, where you're going to put your money. You're going to put your money where you felt that it was going to give you a decent return because the systems and the structures were for the advancement of the whole economy. We are going to talk about plundering settlers as well, I hope. So for a structure that has a Godfather in it, I see most of these people we sometimes call investors as really nothing but plundering settlers that actually came.
Ladies and gentlemen, this expression, you need to write it down. So he sees investors as plundering settlers.
Yeah.
Yes, very, very, very interesting concept.
And we are going to come back to that. But you asked about the godmen. So if there's a godfather out there who has set himself up and the power systems and structures such that they are for his, okay? I think the best example of a level of a godman would be like on a board, a chairman. I was a chairman of Zambia Railways until a few months ago. And we worked very hard to stick to the tenets of sound governance. And that's all we did. But some people that get into those positions have the God tendencies where now, as chairman of this place, I basically have free sway and I'm the final authority here. The CEO can't cough without my allowing him to cough. You know, if he was going to jump, I'll determine how high he's going to jump. Any activity, any conduct in the organization, basically, I call the shots as a godman. Okay, I have so much. I assume so much authority in myself that nothing, but nothing, not a pen is procured, not a ream of paper is procured without my say-so. And I make sure that I actually benefit from everything that happens in that. Now, I'm obviously painting a very extreme picture, and I'm not saying, you know, every person that assumes the running of a governance structure in an organization has these God tendencies. But because these God tendencies exist, therefore entities that are meant to function for the benefit of the economy, for the advancement of the economy, don't actually do that. They are hamstrung, they are basically captured for the benefit of these godmen. And they come into these institutions and into these organizations and they tell you, you know, the Godfather has said. You know, in any governance system where you are having a discussion, a debate, they'll just say, but the Godfather has said. And sometimes they actually even just use the Godfather's name because they know it will actually give them the leverage they want to plunder these institutions.
So in other ways, these are the minions of the Godfather.
You can say that, you know.
And sometimes they don't even get permission from the Godfather.
Yes.
They just do things
they
because...
just use the Godfather's name.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think...
but they know that you, either as management or other members of the governance structure, for instance, won't have access to the Godfather to go and verify.
There's somewhere I read say the Godfather comes in a most credible way, then the godmen are actually just appointed, you do this.
And because they are actually thus appointed by the Godfather, they tend to therefore, I suppose, extend the Godfather's powers and tendencies into their arena where they operate, you know, and so you can't question them, you can't actually debate with them, you can't actually go and put forward a motion that the best way for the organization, the best, you know, structure we should put in place for the benefit of not only this organization but also for the nation is this and that. No, because they will do everything for their own immediate benefit and the benefit of others. Now, this is actually a very important point, and we can talk about banana corporations and pseudo governance, because in these laggard economies, usually the state-owned enterprises are parasites on the state or on the fiscus. If you look at the newly industrialized, the newly advanced economies, the state-owned enterprises are actually engines of advancing those economies, you know. And of course, if these institutions are going to have godmen as figureheads over them, they are going to be parasites, because all that these characters are interested in is how much they can extract, how much they can get for themselves out of these institutions. And because you have this Godfather or God tendency over the organization at the helm, what is the CEO going to do? He's also going to look after himself. What is the FD going to do? They are also going to look after themselves. And what is the rest of the organization going to do? They are only going to have interest for themselves. So and in the process, the whole
sweeping their own corner.
Exactly, and in the process, the whole thing doesn't actually deliver to the advancement of the country. In the process, year in, year out, it runs to the fiscus to get bailed out. And so obviously that can't take an economy forward. Therefore, it remains a laggard economy.
So, for example, if somebody comes and says, you know, I've been seeing in various African countries, when governments change, the whole apparatus changes, and you find that those that are in the inner circle of the new government or in the party, they're the ones that take over the reins of it happens worldwide, especially in laggard economies. So I think what I get from here is that as long as I have a backing and I say, what can you tell me? I was in the trenches with the president, or the president has told me, let me do so. Even when the president hasn't said anything, then we won't get professionalism. But in the USA, I think it's unheard of to come and say, Biden has sent me this, so we need to buy so many shares, or we need to export. People won't simply understand you, or even in Singapore. You know, of course, we have certain economies like China, where we have more like a command economy. But even there, they have a system of meritocracy, meaning you can't just wake up and become the general secretary of the party.
Yes.
You need to rise through the ranks.
Yes.
And at some point, they remove you, they put in another person. There's nothing like the party. So they have a doctrine. The Communist Manifesto says this is what we need to achieve. And people that are supposed to implement that they are, yes, members, maybe some of the Communist Party, but that doesn't mean that they can wake up and say, no, Xi Jinping has told me that we should move this to there. Because you are going to go under the firing squad. And maybe that's why China is developing versus some other countries.
Some other laggard economies.
Laggard economies, yes.
This also takes us to what I said, you know, the issue of economic theories. Some would argue that the third world countries tend to have state control or state interference in the economy, especially through things like state-owned enterprises. And the state-owned enterprises are inefficient. They, as we've said before, suck from the fiscus. They don't positively contribute. Therefore, these economies don't go forward. And then comes along China. And you can't argue that that's a state-controlled economy. Some of my colleagues, some of the people that don't agree with some of the way I think, say, no, but even China has borrowed capitalist tendencies. Even China is implementing, you know, capitalist phenomena, and that's why they're developing. Well, if China is using capitalist formulae, they are being implemented by the state. Mm-hmm. So it's still, if you want, state-controlled capitalism. Now that nothing can be more an oxymoron than that, because capitalism is supposed to be free reign, free market economics.
I just think that I think the Chinese have actually understood that for you to act, because the Chinese work on the Communist Manifesto, so for you to actually beat the capitalist machine, you have to become the capitalist yourself, drive the machine, be the machine.
Right. But that being driven by the state.
Yes.
As opposed to, we're going to leave, you know, Noah and Doc here to their own devices, and in leaving them to their own devices, therefore they are going to use the market to find the most efficient way of allocating resources in the economy. They are going to use the market to find the most, you know, effective clearing price, and therefore be very efficient and amass profits, and those profits The government will, tax some of that for its resources, but some of that profit will trickle down to the rest of the society, and that's how you're going to develop. Okay, that's the blueprint for free market economics. We know that there are very few places where that happens. In fact, what we should actually talk about is the extent of state interference. There's a spectrum. There's no such thing as zero state interference, because we saw the best and most classic example of this is the 2008 economic crisis.
Yes.
When the US had to bail out not companies, whole sectors. Yes. The whole airline industry, the whole motor manufacturing industry, financial sectors, they literally had to bail them out. The state had to intervene for these things to actually be sustained. So there's no such thing as zero state interference. It's a question of, on the spectrum, where are you? Yes. I think we can say the Chinese, maybe the real communism is at 100%.
Yes.
Chinese are somewhere between 75 and 100%. The US isn't at zero. Maybe they are between 25 to 30, 40%, because they interfere, especially they intervene, especially through regulation, in the way that markets conduct themselves. But this is an important point, Doc. Let's just go. So therefore, laggard economies, when they've been labeled third world, one of the excuses that has been given for their lack of development, their lack of advancement, is because of too much state intervention. That's why when we get into crisis situations, when these laggard economies get into crisis situations, Bretton Woods institutions come along and say, stop state involvement in the economy. Get out of the economy and let the economy. And we've seen the adverse crisis that has unleashed on the social sector. But that's a topic for another time.
You mentioned yesterday when we were chatting about, what was that, industrial manufacturing sector productivity.
The manufacturing value add.
Yes, value addition.
Yes.
I remember you were saying that it was around 9%, 8% of GDP at independence.
Yeah.
Then it started going sharp up. Then 90s it sharply fell, and it has come back to 8%, and we have not grown. And that was when we were doing privatization. My way of, the way I look at national economic development is that you need first, you need a sober leader. That is one. A leader with a vision.
Right.
Singapore is an example. Chairman Mao is an example. And to some extent, Putin, what he did, because I saw it, what he did to the Russian economy, it was gone.
Right.
By this time, we're not going to be talking about Russia, that portals and all those things. Now, when you look at a country like Zambia, I believe that, yes, we need to encourage private enterprise.
Right.
We need to also encourage the invisible hand. But in an environment where you are competing, you will wait for 100 years for the invisible hand to come, especially if your population is not educated. They don't know business, and so it will take time for you to catch up.
Right.
Therefore, you are going to be calling upon the settlers that you are going to speak up later. So I believe that you need a government control. And people will say, because you are trained in Russia, you are a communist. I say, no, look. When you look at the way the USA developed, there was huge government intervention. China, Singapore, even in the UK, you were at Cambridge. At some point, the railway line was privatized and again nationalized.
Yes.
Because the invisible hand could not operate the rail line. When you are talking about communism, I'll give you the same example of 2008 crisis. So what did the US do? They printed money. Now what do they say? Which countries print money to fix their deficit? They say it's a laggard economy.
Yes.
But the USA printed money.
Yes.
After printing money, they gave it to companies.
Right.
They went beyond. They have even done it during COVID. They started giving money for free to who? To citizens.
Right.
During COVID, they were basically what has been driving economic development in the USA.
Yeah.
They give checks over $3,000 a month to their citizens.
Right.
Which economic model says you give money for free to citizens? It's the communist model. That's why I believe that for Zambia, for example, to develop, we need the major government intervention, but we should avoid what he's talking about here, the godfather, godmen tendencies. We should avoid that. Then when we look at freedom of speech, because all these things they have to do with. So yesterday, first in Zambia, government closes 1 or 2 TV stations, newspapers, and people say the West, they condemn that. This is not freedom of expression and what. What happens yesterday? Britain, first German bans Russia today to be aired in German.
Right.
Yeah. Then Britain also is saying we are going to ban them. Yeah. Now, if you love freedom of expression, why? Because your country it's free of rational people. Yeah. Let them hear everything. They will choose what to listen to. Believe, yeah. So, but Zambia hasn't stood up to say, but you are stopping us. You are closing, yeah. But they are closing because they are saying it's Russian propaganda. Meanwhile, BBC is everywhere, and who owns BBC? It's the government.
Yeah, yeah.
But here they are telling us government cannot own Times of Zambia. Yeah. These are the tricks that we need to know. The last one I wanted to say. Today I hear that Abramovich, that's a private individual, yeah. Who woke up one day and said, the money I've made in Russia, I'm going to go and buy Chelsea Football Club, yeah. And St. Villa's. They are nationalizing his property.
Yeah.
How can we wake up? I was taught in economics that in a free market economy, property rights should be respected. Yeah. So when we moved on to get Mopane, they spoke against it. Yeah. We are doing one, but the reason was that we are moving into Mopane because the then shareholder was not looking at the best interest of the nation.
Yes.
KCM is the same thing, but today because they say no, Abramovich is a friend to Putin, we need to grab the property, and those are billions of dollars.
Yeah.
Where is the level of playing ground there? It's for you to judge, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, yeah. I think let's carry on with the laggard. Because some of the other characters we need to think about is, for instance, what I call the geriatrics. There's a chapter in the book about geriatrics are plenty, wisdom are scarce. But by the way, a number of phrases and concepts I used what they call poetic license, right? To just put them together. They may not even be in the dictionary. But I think one of the key phenomena in the laggard economies is that we seem to have a huge divorce between those that they may be running the affairs of the country and the wisdom that we are supposed to actually learn from, that we are supposed to use to guide ourselves, that is supposed to be reposited in the older generation. Partly because I think the older generation have just become bad, like I keep saying, just geriatrics with lack of wisdom. And this I think is a big it's a big drawback for these laggard economies. I think that if we could master some of the wisdom that you had that should be reposed in this old generation, we would actually do very well as economies, would actually advance as economies. I think about boards, and I go and preside over this board, and I reflect that there was Insaka system in our culture long before anybody heard of a board. The Insaka was a place where the older generation came together and not only shared among themselves how to best, take their village forward, how to structure the village, but also gave wisdom and instruction to young people in a way that they should actually come up. And the young people that went and listened to the advice and the guidance of the Insaka system then turned out to be much better citizens or much better members of the village, and eventually to obviously take over from the elders. And those that didn't actually listen were eventually outcasts. They were the fools of the village, you know. And if that sort of structure was there before these plundering settlers came along, colonizers, why can't we actually harness something like that and use that as almost, if you want, the system for governance? Because then we would actually gather together very wise people that, and for me, we should have a lot of wise people around among the older generation, because if you think about what they've gone through, what they've experienced, some of them were there in the time of independence struggle. They actually saw how people were mistreated, were subjugated by the colonial system. They fought that and they succeeded. They then came through into a very divided world, where there was there was the West and there was the East. And for most newly independent countries, they chose the East because the colonizers came from the West. And they suffered the pains of now being divided against by the West because they were leaning towards the East. Their economies being deliberately undermined because they had East leanings. Okay, they survived through that. They came through the transition of multi-party. Most of these laggard economies have now gone to multi-party. There's a few that are still behaving as one-party states, but most of them have gone through. So they've actually gone through the multi-party system. They've seen that come to be in place. And for countries like ours that have had this multi-party system for more than 30 years now, you would actually want to see dividends of democracy, so to say, in terms of the advancement of the economy, because democracy is supposed to be one of the factors that contribute to the advancement of the economy. We have seen that some of these laggard economies haven't advanced even after going the multi-party. But we have people that have lived through all these systems, that have learned from all these many epochs that they've been exposed to, that should be such strong fountains of wisdom that should give guidance to the way that these economies, laggard economies, should go forward. And for me, their absence is just so deafening. There's just deafening silence in the void where these wise people are supposed to be. And I think because most of them are but just geriatrics without wisdom. Somehow the wisdom that they're supposed to have has been squandered through maybe godfather tendencies, maybe not wanting to remain in the village mentality, westernizing themselves, wanting to amass wealth overnight, therefore jetsoning, the wisdom that's supposed to be there. So for me, I think this is one of the big, and those that are in that bracket that are meant to be wise, and for some countries actually the godfathers themselves. You see the foolish tendencies that you have, that they have, and you therefore cannot but conclude that these are foolish geriatrics. So for me, that's another characteristic that we actually need to address. How do we go and tap the wisdom that is supposed to be there? And if they are foolish geriatrics, obviously, it's a big blight on these economies.
Sorry, to cut you off a little bit. It was also a suggestion that as we transition from then to now, were we supposed to be molding our own system of governance where we bring in where we come from? Let's say, as Africans, we used to be gatherers. We would all as a village gather and benefit from whatever resources might be available.
Yeah.
To where we've been, what we've been through, and model our own system of governance.
I actually think that all these things that we are seeing now, let's for instance talk about, this whole notion that we should be more caring for the environment, this whole green movement. Our roots will show that we actually lived very sustainably with the environment in which we lived. There was the consciousness that we actually benefit from this environment. Therefore, we benefit from whether it's the fauna or the flora. Therefore, we don't actually go and abuse it. And so we lived in harmony with the environment in which we lived, if we go back to the roots. And so, yeah, there are things that would have easily carried forward that would have resulted in more sustainability and therefore more advancement than what is obtaining at the moment. Yes, there's an opportunity that we should actually be crafting our own way, because, and that's why laggard economies. Because at the start, out of the starting blocks of independence, there was no telling that any of those countries or nations were going to advance as far forward, for instance, as South Korea advanced, right? But they crafted their own way and their own formulae to be able to advance. There wasn't a blueprint. Nobody had a blueprint at that time that they gave to Korea and say, here, if you use this, you can advance. No. They crafted their own model, their own, a system that helped them advance. So there's this said about us needing to do that.
There's this thing that various schools of thought say, no, we need FDI everywhere. It's even a measure of national economic development. How much FDI did you receive? I've been hearing FDI since 1991. Right. We need FDI, but still we don't have jobs. Where are we getting it wrong? I know you have that part in your book.
I read something recently, I think in the course of this week, somebody spoke about how much investment is in the US versus, for instance, how much investment goes into China. And the conclusion was that there's more countries that invest in the US than FDI that goes into some of these countries, and China being a good case in point. A lot of economies invest in the securities in the US for whatever reason.
I think maybe it's for liquidity reasons. Their financial securities or their capital market is highly liquid.
That's one way of looking at it. The other way is that the dollar is a safe bet compared to other currencies. Okay, so it looks like there's actually more investment in the US economy than in the economies that need foreign direct investment, so to speak. So this FDI thing, therefore, is a bit of a red herring, really, because that's one dimension. Obviously, that dimension is, can we show, now if we go again to core economics, can you actually show that where there has been more FDI, there has been more advancement of the economy? Because if FDI is just nominal FDI, in most instances, it's but plundering. What comes in or what investors claim to bring in and what they take out, the latter is far much more than what comes in. They come but to plunder. Okay, what the newly advanced economies, and I say newly advanced because we're talking laggard. So what the newly advanced economies did was master FDI. Use FDI in a way that was going to advance their economies. And some of those dimensions were licensing the technology, for instance, to a given country, to the extent that eventually some of that technology became indigenized in those economies. And as we speak today, there are cases of suing and counter-suing between some of these major technology firms, between who stole whose technology and stuff, between South Korea and the US, for instance, because they took that technology and as much as possible indigenized it, and from indigenizing it, coming up with their own brands and their own products. The Chinese are accused of espionage left, right, and center, but they are using that technology to nationalize, so to speak, and use that to. So the Chinese, as a case in point, came up with 5G and caught everybody napping, because they had gone and got this technology when it was, 1.5G, 1G, exactly. And they had been working on it, advancing it as Chinese, by a Chinese entity. And by the time they actually came out with 5G, those other advanced economies cried foul, right? What they started talking against 5G, they started linking 5G to COVID and all sorts of things, just to undermine it, because how can they have come up with that? So FDI needs to be used to indigenize technology. And then once you've got that technology, so it can't just be cash. It's technology, it's technical ability.
It can't just be limiting the externalization of funds, but also technology-wise.
You're watching Economic Briefcase on Camnet TV. We'll we'll go for a short break, and when we come back, we'll be opening the lines, and we're also taking your messages. You can participate and ask your questions through direct phoning or messages on the number that is appearing below the screen. We'll be right back.
We still need more players, yes, because we need to balance the team. We need to have maybe on one position 3 or 4 players.
The third Camnet Stars football trial is on. This time, Camnet Stars are looking for young, talented and skilled soccer players between the age of 18 and 20 years old. Start your lucrative football career in Europe this July. If you know you are one of Zambia's best gifted soccer players, don't waste your time. On Sunday, the 12th March 2022, there will be trials for professional soccer stars. Venue, Kablonga Boys Secondary School grounds. Time, registration 13 hours. Kick-off 14 hours. 100 kwacha non-refundable shall be paid, and your birth records must be produced upon registration. Camnet Stars, setting football standards for international market.
Are you a qualified and skilled marketing person? Have you got the passion and motivation as a marketer? Camnet TV is looking for self-motivated, qualified marketers. For more details, please call 0962 965 883 or send your details to the email info@camnettvafrica.com. Remember that Camnet TV is not just another channel.
Camnet TV is becoming big and better. You can now watch Camnet TV wherever you are around the world, simply by downloading the Camnet TV app. With Camnet TV app, you only use less bundles. Camnet TV, not just another channel.
Welcome back. You're watching Economic Briefcase on Camnet TV, and our guest today is Dr. Wala CHABALA. We are discussing lagging economies and how can African countries achieve first world status or advanced status. Before we broke off for a break, we were talking about a very important issue, but I wanted us to, in your book, there's something very important that you have, you've highlighted here, how government structures, differences in structures between advanced economies and lagging economies. You call it broken arms, added arms.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So the idea is that government has arms. Some call it wings of government, and I say, but you can't have more than two wings. So maybe that's not a very good analogy. So let's talk about arms. Even arms, you're going to argue and say, but you can only have two arms. So maybe there's a third arm sticking out in front here. But most governments anyway have three arms of government. And the idea is that these three arms of government are meant to be independent. And it's the independence of the arms of government that allows for checks and balances. Even before you go multi-party, even before you bring in
Sorry, Doc, to cut you short, we have our first caller. Your name and where you're calling from?
Hello?
Hello, your name and where you're calling from?
Good evening.
Good evening.
This is Dr. Mkandawire from Rwanda.
Yes, Doc.
Yes, what you're talking about is very important to our country because we need to spare. And truly, I'm also against the concept of fake wealth and fake wealth. Now I'm looking at the way we began as Zambia with our Dr. Kaunda. Don't you think that in line with what you are talking about, that we started on a good note, and then later on, we went off? Because I'm thinking of this pineapple industry, the battery industry, the car industry, Livingstone, and some other things that Kaunda established. Did we go over at privatization or what? May I know, enlighten me on this one. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Doc.
Thank you, Dr. Mkandawire from Luansha. A colleague of yours in Luansha, Mr. Piat Siwale, is one that has read my book and has made some comments. I don't know if you know each other. So it looks like there's a lot of interest in development in Luansha. To your point, Dr. Habazoka referred to a conversation we were having yesterday about manufacturing value add, how that at independence it was below 10%. And from independence, it continued to increase. And I think through the efforts of the then government and the leader that government had in Kaunda, it continued to increase until 1991-92, that it went up to about 33% of GDP. Manufacturing value add as a percentage of GDP went up to about 33%. Between 93 and 94, it plummeted like throwing a stone in water, basically a straight line drop down to the pre-independence levels of below 10%. And funny enough, it has hovered in that region ever since. Now, this is again what we're discussing about the different schools of economic development. The pre-1991 model you would have called socialism and state intervention. But it was that system that increased manufacturing value add up to the percentage of 33 we're talking about. The post-91 system is what you could call free market economics, if you want. It has not delivered the same level of manufacturing value add as you had in the pre-91 system. And you make a very valid point when you give those examples. The manufacturing value add established industries, and by the way, post-1991, and for me, until Dangote came along, most industries in the country were taken over from those that were established by the state. Let me say this again. Not any greenfield industry was established post-1991 until, say, Dangote came along. Most were taken over from what was established by the state in what was called privatization. So it's like we went to a system of economic model that was supposed to proliferate industry in this country, but instead didn't, just rode on the industries that the state had established. So what happened to this FDI that is supposed to come in the free market economy and establish new industries and increase manufacturing value add and therefore contribute to job creation? Somehow it didn't happen. That's why we're saying that the laggard economy is, in some instances, and I call it dysfunctionalism, in some instances they've actually continued to drive economic structures or economic systems that were put in place by the colonial masters. Let's give an example of some of our industries here. We have mining, where 98% of the product of mining is exported in raw form out of the country. That's exactly what Cecil Rhodes intended to do when he came here, almost 100 years ago, is to grab these resources that you could mine from the ground and take them to his country for the industrialization of that country. Almost 100 years later, 60 years after independence, we are still extracting mining product out of this country in raw form, going to benefit another country's industrialization. When by now we should actually be saying up to 50%, 60% of what comes out of those mines needs to stay here for value addition in this country, because then we'll set up industry bases. Then if you go from, I grew up in Chingola, by the way, if you go from Chilabombe all the way to Kitwe, that stretch of the country should actually be inhabited by industry stacks upon industry stacks that are adding value to the product of mining that we actually at the moment just exporting in raw form.
We have another caller. Your name and where you're calling from?
I'm Mr. Ningesu, calling you from Ningesu.
Yes, sir. How is Livingi?
Livingi is bad.
Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Yeah. You have said that in African nations achieve the first class status. That's what you said. Yes. African nations can achieve first class world status. Why I say so is that it is in Africa where we have abundance of natural resources, which our colleagues from the West and China are looking for. So if we ourselves, we can come up with our own homegrown solutions with what we have in this nation, I can tell you we can never grow.
Yes.
Africa can never grow. Now the problem that we have is this. Each time we have put political leaders in place, the president, they don't have that mind for the nation. They have got the fear of political, winning, people on their side. For example, what I want to give you an example. Zambia has periphery farms, and those farms you grow maize and soya beans. That will be made for export to DRC, Kenya, Tanzania, and Botswana. Meaning that the money that we take from those periphery farms, we can now even pay off this debt that we have. Then the inland farms that we have, under which myself I fall in, we produce maize and soya beans that can be used inland here in Zambia or Zambia. Then how can we be poor?
Yes.
We can never be poor. And also there could be a lot of abundant water resources.
Yes.
If we can cut that water and preserve that water for irrigation systems, we can grow maize in a year maybe 3 times, 4 times. And that maize also, we can export the nearest CRC. So that's what I'm telling you that Africa, we are rich. Now the problem that we have is that we want to adopt the way of the West. The way they did it there, the way they did it in Singapore, in Mauritius, in where. No, we must not adopt their own way. Let us have our own way of solving our own problems. I like what Dr. Eddie CHABALA is talking about. That we are infertile. That is what we must go back to. Let us white people. Egypt in the Bible, they had Joseph who was white, and they didn't have problems. They came out of problems. So today, we need to have the Joseph. We need to have the white people. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Thank you very much.
I couldn't agree with you more, but I'll go one further and say, don't just export the maize. Here's a very real scenario. Katanga is a province that borders Copperbelt province. Katanga as a province has the population of the whole country of Zambia. Katanga doesn't grow much in terms of agricultural product to feed itself. Why is it, well, I don't know where we are at the moment, but for a long period of time in this country, we have considered trade with our neighbor to the north as smuggling. And we've more times than not curtailed any trade arrangements between us. We've banned trade. Now, if that country needs to be fed, if the population of the province next to us needs to be fed, why don't we actually go and set up in that neighboring town probably the equivalent of all the milling companies that we have in the country that we use at the moment to feed this country? Set up in that town for the sole purpose of producing product to sell to our neighboring country that needs that product for their survival. So I'll go further than just maize. Let's actually go and make milling mill in Chilabombwe. We are going to need to set up the equivalent of all the milling companies in Lusaka and Kabwe and in Dola in Chilabombwe for the benefit of feeding Katanga, because Katanga has the same population of Zambia. What does that do to job creation? With the dwindling of mine activity or the advancement of mining technology where they don't need so many people, you are going to mop up all the unemployed youth in Chilabombwe, in Chingola, working in these milling companies for the sole purpose of feeding Katanga province. It's a no-brainer. The manufacturing value add that's hovering around 9%, below 10%, will start ticking up if we do things like that. You know, so yes, pineapples, let's go one further and go back to manufacture, to value addition to those pineapples. Let's go to value addition to so many of our agricultural products for the benefit of trading primarily with our neighbors. But with the Africa Free Continental Trade Area coming up, Continental Trade Free Area coming up, we should actually seek to add as much value to our product as possible for the benefit of trading with the other African states. Yes, as far afield as East Africa, why not? You know, and by the way, they say the other dimension we have to look at is that if you are going to export a product to which you haven't added that much value, the cost of that product, when you add the transportation cost, becomes uncompetitive in the market where it's going. But if you add value, obviously the value that added, the transportation cost as a percentage will be that much less. So you actually be putting in the markets where you're exporting more beneficial products. The same argument for me is the one we should apply to the mining product. Why is it that it's okay to transport for thousands of kilometers raw mining product, where you could argue the cost of transportation as a percentage is that much higher than if you added value here? The simple reason why that doesn't happen, that logic is not applied, is because this product is used for the industrialization of where the product is going, the destination country. And therefore they don't care so much about the cost of transporting it, because the benefit of using it for industrialization is so much higher than, you know, the real price of it.
Director, do we have any messages? If we have any, we can start loading up the messages. Looking at the current leaders we have in Africa, we can't achieve a first world status because our leaders are so self and mostly are just depending on the donation and grants and loans from Western world. Socrates Kangwa.
Right, the God tendency we spoke about, you
Yes.
know, if the leaders have the tendency of godfathers, then their being in the place of leading the country is not for the benefit of the country. It's for their own benefit. The godfather in the criminal organization makes sure that he gets the biggest cut out of every deal, out of every transaction that's happening that he has tentacles into. If you have that tendency of the leader at the helm of the country, you can't expect the economy to advance. The leader of the economy is actually the one that is contributing to its laggardness, so to speak, instead of, you know, promoting its advancement.
Let's you know, finish there's a point where we're trying to discuss the structure of government. Broken arms, added arms.
Indeed, and so we're saying that there are three, yes, then a call came through. There are three arms of government, and they're meant to be independent, and they provide among the three of them checks and balances. But where you don't have them as independent, particularly where they're subject to a godfather, the godfather then arbitrarily uses these arms of government, obviously for their benefit. They use the arms of government, some of them to minimize their role, to break them, so to speak, others to have a more domineering role in the functioning of government. But not only do they break some, I think in their way of operation, they also add others, hence the chapter on broken arms, added arms. And the added ones are obviously also added arbitrarily. Mostly through political machinations or mechanisms, because those with political power feel that, you know, the way this thing is being done is not benefiting them. Okay, so let's add this other structure because now it will benefit us. And so because you don't actually have, you know, well-structured operation and functioning of government, these brokenness and arbitrary additions end up just, you know, taking away from the economy of the state as opposed to advancing it. You know, so all these are things that then contribute to the laggardness off the laggard economies as opposed to helping them advance?
We have some more messages. We can just beam them, Director. Maybe as the Director is looking for the messages, where can we find the book?
Yeah, good question, good point. So at the moment, the book is available in Book World. I don't know which branches of Book World, but it's available in Book World. If you go to Book World and you give them the name of the book, they will look in the system and they'll find it. And if the specific shop doesn't have it, they can always get it from the shop that has it. It's also at the moment available in East Park Mall. There's a bookstore in East Park Mall that is also holding stock of the book. But of course, if you want an autographed copy and you are within reach of Lusaka, we can always organize that we deliver a copy to you.
I think we'll pick one more caller. Your name and where you're calling from?
Thank you so much. Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Kalabon, and I'm following the deliberations that are going on.
Honorable.
So, I wanted to make a contribution that, in Africa, it's going to take very long to achieve the first world status because of, I think the leadership approach that we take in Africa is that we misplace priorities. The things that are relevant, we don't want to put resources, we don't want to allocate sufficient resources. The things that are not important, you find that that's where the money goes. You have highlighted very good points, for example, the issues that you are talking about, value addition, for example, in the mining sector. You see, countries in Africa cannot develop if us as Africans or as government do not fund money in areas where we want, to help us develop. For example, when we talk of industrialization, like getting money to invest in value addition, if the government can make an effort, a deliberate effort to invest in machinery that can help us to enhance the value of, the minerals that we get from our mines, you will find that it's very easy for us to make, to add value to the minerals that we are producing. But if we just leave it to the miners, the people who are investing, they will keep on getting our raw materials, our minerals in raw form.
Yes.
Then they will keep on taking to their country so that they can be adding value from their country, thereby, industrializing the countries where they come from. So I do agree with you. Then what I just wanted to contribute is that it's just misplaced priorities by leadership in Africa. Then also the other issue is the protectionist policies. I heard you, Dr. Wala, you were talking about the issue of maybe processing maize so that we make meal to export to Congo and other neighboring countries. These protectionist policies that we have sometimes, the person can have a lot of maize, and he has a milling plant, he produces maize, but he can't export because of the subsidies that were given to people, the people who didn't even, maybe the people who, when they were given fertilizer, they didn't farm, they just sold to other people. But a person who is an entrepreneur will end up suffering because of the subsidies that he didn't even benefit from. That is my short contribution, Doctor. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think you are absolutely spot on. we do need to think about value addition. I talk about having a deliberate industrialization plan that is owned by government, and then government works with partners to commandeer resources that are going to take that industrialization master plan forward. In all sectors, agriculture and mining and technology and etc. and etc. I think we are running out of time, Doc. This calls for another intervention in the near future.
For me, as we close, Mr. Japao, your last remarks.
I think it has been a very good conversation, very good interview with Dr. CHABALA. What I picked up, we need to have proper functioning systems, and I think we need to, and corporate governance at national level starts with the ones who are on the top to implement good corporate governance policies, and it spreads to different regulatory authorities. And if these authorities are functioning well, then we can possibly achieve that status, coupled with all these that we're just from discussing now: value addition, industrialization, exploiting the markets that we have around us.
Dr. Chawa, last remarks?
First of all, gentlemen, thank you very much for having me. When you said about 90 minutes to 2 hours, I was thinking, what are we going to talk about in all that time? And here we are. We've only scratched the surface. There's still more to discuss. But thank you so much for having me. And for the callers, it's clear that and I found this actually for all that I've read the book. And by the way, I actually say in the book that the purpose of this is to encourage, if not provoke, discussion. And that's exactly what has obtained. And therefore, let's find space and time to dialogue more, to collaborate more. If you get a copy of the book and you want to reach me, call Dr. Habazoka or Mr. Njapao and get my contact details, and we can dialogue and work together, think together how we can take this country forward. Thank you so much.
Dear viewers, I think that this topic needs more digesting. I will try to speak to our father, Pastor Chiluba, to create space on national matters for Dr. Chaba to come and share more about this book. For me, I think that this book should be used. We have a new government. The new government is very passionate about fighting corruption, and I've seen quite a number of workshops that have been created. I think this book can be a very good book to go and train our government, our various technocrats, to see how, because it teaches how not to do things and how to do things. And I think if we have to move to a developed country, we really need to be able to digest. And these are the types of books that are written by intellectuals that we are supposed to grasp. I know they say that if you want to hide something from an African, put it in a book. Yeah. But I think, colleagues, you have seen all those missiles that are flying in Europe. Those missiles, that technology has been written in a book. If we just open and master that, we'll be able to do that one day, God forbid. Also, national economic development, and how we behave in national economic development. These things are right here in the books. Let's read. Let's have very educative, discourse in the country. I don't think we should be discussing those memes and all the other things that I see on Facebook. For a nation to develop, we really need to discuss real issues, and such books are thought-provoking. And as we close, just on TV, I know Mrs. Chawala actually very, very well. Right. But I didn't know that she was your Mrs. Chawala. So when I was reading the beginning of the book, I was very shocked. So I said, okay, let me say it on TV, because she won't, I'm sure she's watching. Right. She won't believe that,
that you didn't know.
I know both of you very well, but very separately.
I think that's true of most people. But yeah. She, I think there's a
portion. That's where I read.
Portion it's in the acknowledgement.
Yes.
Where I say that I have to give her great credit and gratitude because she, at some point, thinking it was tongue-in-cheek, commented that the laptop had replaced her in bed in the course of writing this. And for me, that just underscores the kind of effort and time and dedication that it takes to write something like this. And therefore, to Doc's point, why maybe we should actually invest some time and effort in digesting it and either agreeing with it or disagreeing with it, but let's use it as a basis for a discourse going forward as a country. Thank you so much once again, Jennifer.
Thank you very much for coming. Dear viewers, Camnet family, thank you for joining us today. The program, of course, is going to there's going to be a repeat. You can watch it on Facebook, on YouTube. You know, we are live also in other countries via satellite. For those wishing us to be inviting people from, not only from Lusaka, but from across the country, please get in touch with the marketing department of Camnet TV to come and sponsor the program. Continue watching Camnet TV, because Camnet TV is not just another channel. See you next week.